Okay, folks, it's time. It's time to do a big review for you. We're going to take a look today at Frank Herbert's Dune. Now, if you'll recall in my Starship Troopers review by Robert Heinlein that I did for you previously, I've been talking about the fact that I wanted to do some bigger name classic works as a part of this series. When the series debuted, I wanted to kind of find these unearthed treasures that were out there that people, or books that you'd heard about but never actually gone out and read, authors that you heard about but things by them that you may not have heard about, like H.G. Wells' short stories, those sorts of things. So I very rarely have done actual proper classics because I've tried to stay away from the ones that everybody has read. But now that I think about it, I've done a few classics here and there as they've been appropriate. And as I talked about with Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, this is something that I'm going to start moving towards because I do want to kind of embrace it. I also think this could be an on-ramp for the channel. If somebody finds, if they're searching for a Dune review on YouTube, they might find this video and then they might be like, oh yeah, I like that Dune review. What else has this guy done? And then they may find some of the other books that I've been talking about, like Earth Abides by Stewart or something like that, right? Or they may find some of these other works that are out there and may be inspired by that. So that's what I want to do for you today, is take a look at Dune. Now, what I want to do is I want to give you I was trying to think on how could I do a review on Dune that would be different, because Dune is the Lord of the Rings of science fiction. It is the book that has been the most read, the most published, the most purchased. It's the most, it's arguably the single most impactful work in science fiction. How can I have a different take on my Dune review? And then I remembered something very important. I actually don't think Dune is science fiction. I think it's science fantasy. And so I figured what I'll do for you today is I'll take Dune, give you a quick synopsis of it, just to remind you in case you haven't read it for a while. And this is also a good time to talk about Dune since there is a movie supposed to be coming out in December, although it could be pushed back for COVID reasons. But this is also a good time to talk about Dune, take a moment and kind of talk about it for you. And I'm also going to argue that this is a science fantasy novel, not a science fiction novel. I'm going to make that argument for you as a part of this novel. So as a reminder, in Dune, you're going to open up in the first chapter our young Atreides, who's still young and very cocky and sure of himself, has somebody who has been gaining powers and been trained by his mother. He undergoes a testing whereby this Holy Mother, who is the main Bene Gesserit in the kingdom, she's the key Bene Gesserit advisor for the Emperor, and she is there looking in on him and going to be giving him a test of pain to see if he can survive it, and thus become, and at the end, he'll survive the test and she'll be calling him human. Both his mother and herself believe that this gentleman could wind up being this sort of a Bene Gesserit chosen one with some additional abilities. And you will see throughout the book that these Bene Gesserit, that are most of the women in the kingdom, have been trained and have the ability to tap various powers that are not just normal, I can punch or attack somebody, but have additional powers that they can tap into. You will find out, of course, during the course of this novel that our good Atreides is going to the new planet of Dune, Arrakis, is a trap that's been set for them by both the Emperor and by Baron Harkonnen, who's the main bad guys. And I could be mispronouncing the name of it, Harkonnen. Who knows? It's a long word and it's real, and you read a lot, but you'll find out that this will be a trap. But they know that it's going to be a trap, so they go into it and try to be able to, because of course the best trap that you know is one that when you're triggering it, when you know that it's a trap. So hopefully you can trap the trappers, and you can out trap them. Especially if you don't have another option. And so they head off to Dune, and you're going to be trained, and you're going to see his interaction with his trainers, and so forth. Our key figure, who is the young Atreides, who is the next heir, the next in line to be Duke after his father. Should his father have an untimely death, they'll go over to Dune. On the Dune planet, he'll show more signs. Occasionally here and there, he's having dreams. He's having signs and so forth. And you know that he's going to die, his father's going to die. Even if you've never read the novel, you know that he's going to die because at the beginning of each chapter there is a little passage by Princess Irulan, who's writing the memoirs of the life of the young Atreides, of Muad'Dib. And in there, she will actually tell you ahead of time in a sort of foreshadowing who the traitor is going to be, who's going to die, those sorts of things ahead of time. So you know that the Duke Atreides is going to die, Leto, and when he dies, he's going to pass it on to his son Paul, and Paul's going to take over the heir, and so forth. And you know that even in the first book, he has been called. The sort of there is a prophecy about the Bene Gesserit woman and her son on the earth, and they are sort of embraced by the local Fremen culture almost as soon upon the arriving. Although there are some trials upon their arrival, but by some local people that are there on the local planet. So what you'll see over the course of the book is you will see both Jessica, the Bene Gesserit woman, exhibiting Bene Gesserit powers. She moves quickly. She can outthink other people. She has the ability to connect with others. She can see past lives. She has a lot of powers. The Fremen also have some local wise women too. That they call Reverend Mothers, that do various things and have various powers too. Jessica will become one of them. You'll also have the new Duke. He also has a lot of powers too, and you'll find out that he actually is and I can never pronounce this to save my life, the Quasaj Haderach. I'm sure I'm butchering that, but he's the chosen one, if you will, of the Bene Gesserit, and he has a lot of powers himself, more so than the others. And his sister, Aaliyah, who is going to be born almost like will have some additional powers too that are beyond what a normal Bene Gesserit would have. So you're going to see a variety of these powers that are happening, that are out there that these folks have. Now, please note, and you're also going to see that the spice actually enhances powers, or will give powers to people that might not otherwise have them. So that's Dune. You probably have known about it, you've read about it, you've seen it on TV, on the miniseries, the movies, the new movie, and so forth. It's not a surprise. And again, what happens in the story isn't a surprise if you read those prefaces on your first reading through the story by Princess Irulan. You know what's going to happen if you're reading those that begin each chapter, which I actually think is a very good way of making it much more grounded, making it with a much more epic feel. You have okay, but what's going to happen here? How is that going to happen? How's the treason going to happen? And then when you read about the actual treasonous act, you're like, that's actually fairly reasonable. I can see why you would want to do that, and how you can see how you turn Duke Leto into your own method of punishing Baron Harkonnen and taking him down with you. I think that's, and yet he's trying to save people while he's doing it. He's not fully traitor, and I like that, and I like that sort of swap on it. I do think that that Frank Herbert did a good job with that. But having said it, here's my science fantasy argument. What is science fantasy? First, science fantasy is the genre that connects science fiction and fantasy. It's when you give science fiction answers to fantasy things that happen. And I'm going to give you two science fantasies that are very popular, and then show how Dune is more like those than a traditional science fiction. The first of those is Dragonsriders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey. In the Dragonsriders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey, a future colony of Earth and humans settles on a planet that they want to set up a low tech planet in a far-flung colony where they want to set up this sort of Middle Ages thing because they think that was when we were best, and so forth. They had this sort of like a simple things, by the simple life, simple things, simple idea, kind of like Quakers or something like that, this sort of throwback thing. And so they go out there to have their sort of Middle Ages thing. They arrive there. There are these local fire drakes and dragons that can be tamed, can be connected with psychically. If they eat a certain rock, they can breathe fire. And they will be used eventually by these people to protect themselves from the fall of thread from a planet that orbits the place, and it comes by every so many years. And when it does, it launches this thread that will attack the world where they live. And so in order to deal with this thread fall, they have these flying dragons that can teleport themselves from one place to another and breathe the fire on to take down these threads that are being ridden by their psychic dragon riders. Now, that is a fantasy feeling idea. Dragons flying around, breathing fire, you're flying around on them, they're teleporting from one place to another, you're magically talking with them and connecting with them. But it is described in a science fiction context. This is a far-flung planet. They wanted a low-tech civilization, right? The local creatures there are lizard-likes that can fly. They have to, the connection isn't magical, it's psychic. They have to eat a rock in order to breathe fire for a certain period of time. They just can't just innately breathe fire, which makes no sense from a natural law standpoint, right? It is a science fiction explanation of a traditional fantasy feeling, Middle Ages, dragons, those sorts of things, feeling world. That it's science fantasy. It's not science fiction, it's not fantasy, it's science fiction. Science fantasy. Another example, probably more popular to people today, is Star Wars. You've got monks, you've got wizards, you've got people launching lightning bolts from one person to another with it's called the power of the Force rather than magic, but it just looks like a magic game. They're fighting with swords that are created with special weapons and so forth. It is a fantasy style setting of powers, a fantasy style setting of technology and so forth of things. But it has a science fiction explanation to it. The lightsaber, the Force, even the much hated midichlorians that tells you who can be more powerful of a Force user than others. But that's, again, it's a science fiction answer to your fantasy. It is a science fantasy work. Not fantasy in space, not science fiction in space, but fantastic elements told with a scientific reason, with a science fiction reason. That is science fantasy. And I'm going to argue to you that Dune is science fantasy. It's not science fiction proper. And my reason for that is very simple. The Bene Gesserit have powers, and I mentioned this in a few different places, of a variety of different types. Our main character has powers of a variety of different types. The people, like the local Fremen who are taking spices, have powers of a variety of different types. Even the guild has powers of various different types. They can detect time and those sorts of things. But all of them, all these different powers that these people have, are explained through a science fiction lens, through the breeding program of the Bene Gesserit, through the eating of spice, through these, which is very similar to eating the rocks, right, for the dragons. There are these different explanations for it in the sort of text itself. So I would argue for those reasons, Dune is more properly classified as science fantasy than science fiction. Also, it's soft science fiction. It's not hard. For example, at no point in time in this novel does Frank Herbert ever give you a physical description of an ornithopter. They're very important to the entire novel. Lots of people have them. They'll be captured, they'll be turned on people, they'll be used against people. They're an incredibly important part of the infrastructure of the world, and they are regularly there. But you never have but even in the 600 pages that Frank Herbert has on this thing, never once does he spend a paragraph, not even a line, physically describing an ornithopter. It just never happens. He never bothers to do that. It's just not, he doesn't give you the scientific explanation. He doesn't spend a page telling you, here's the scientific explanation on what they look like, why they work. It's not something he cares about. He doesn't do the same thing with still suits. How do still suits work? We know what they do, but how do they work? I don't know. This is a soft science fiction, not a hard science fiction. But the problem is that the ones that have tried to dip into it have tried to come up with hard science fiction. I particularly think that the miniseries for the Science Fiction Network was more hard than soft. I do think that the movie by David Lynch had that sort of a crazy, oh wow, this thing's a very disjointed feel of the soft science fiction feel of Dune. But I do think that there was a harder science fiction feel to it. They tried to make it more serious, more grounded, that sort of thing in the limited series that was on Sci-Fi about 20 years ago. That I watched. That I still have on DVD, by the way. But anyway, I'll go ahead and leave you there. Have you read Dune? Do you agree with my thoughts that it's science fiction or disagree? Let me know why. Anything else about Dune you want to talk about? It is a classic of science fiction, so again, I'm trying to bring in some of these things for you, so that way they could be an onboard rant for more people, or just a great place for you to come and talk about classics, maybe in a different way. Maybe you've never thought about it as a science fantasy, or maybe you have. Maybe you think about it too. Happy to engage you with those things more in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please feel encouraged to hit that subscribe button. There's going to be so many more of these reviews to follow. And finally, I just want to thank you for taking some time out of your day and watching my video. We all have so many things happening in our lives, right? So the fact that you spent this time with me is so humbling, and I really do appreciate that. Thanks again, and have a great day.